I met Dr. Catherine Meeks a number of times. She came to the University of Rochester in 1987 to speak at the Consistent Life Ethic Conference, and it was called the CLEAR Conference, Consistent Life Ethic, a Reality. And Dr. Catherine Meeks was there to speak about a different kind of way to connect issues and to see consistent life ethic. And I was looking over my notes, and she was shocked that I still had my notes. She basically, her ethic of consistency adds a different kind of a dimension and another level. The connection between a sense of identity and empowerment and how that interfaces with necessary cultural transformation. And she's going to bring that home to us today to talk a little bit about that. To add to what the biographical information says in our program to Catherine, she also is a writer for the Huffington Post and a columnist with the Macon Telegraph. Her things that she covers are human relations and racism and civility in culture. Catherine has a master's degree in social work and has her PhD in psychology and African American literature from Emory University. She is also the Clara Carter Acree Distinguished Scholar and Professor of Socioeconomic and Cultural Studies from Wesleyan College. She is the founding executive director of the Lane Center, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. Catherine has 2 books that are available for sale on our sale table. Bears and Butterflies. It sounds like it's a biographical treatise about Catherine. Would that be?
Well, no, it's really a self-help, but it's got some biographical.
Some biographical in it, as well as some Jungian psychology and how it's applied to our lives today. Through It All is a book about your sister. Is that correct, Catherine? This book comes with a DVD, so we present those over there on the table. So I know that you're going to be overwhelmed with Catherine, because when we brought her to the University of Rochester for the Consistent Life Ethic, a Reality, the CLEAR Conference, she was there with Julie Lesh as well as Mark Hatfield. And Senator Mark Hatfield from Oregon, you might remember, was one of the very, very few Congress senators who embraced a consistent life ethic and spoke about it. He was the co-sponsor of the Nuclear Freeze Act, and of course was also a sponsor of the Human Rights Amendment. So he knew what it felt like to try to jockey those 2 worlds, as you will. And he had a lot of interesting stories to tell to the university. And so he and Catherine brought different perspectives. His was how to address a consistent life ethic in politics, and Catherine's message was more of the interpersonal realm. So I present to you now Dr. Catherine Meeks.
I can't believe you still have those notes. I have no idea what I said. It's really quite an honor to be asked to be here for this 25th anniversary of Consistent Life Ethic. I remember that I was on the advisory board, and we were working on the mission statement, and I had a 1-year-old, or not quite a 1-year-old, that I was trying to manage, and I was trying to finish a dissertation, so I was a little crazy, to say the least. And it's been it's been nice to even just remember that, and it's even nicer to be 25 years away from it, actually. So I want to just read a couple of things, and then then I'll talk about them. I spent a lot of time reflecting upon the earlier years when I was involved in helping to carve out the mission statement and helping to launch what was then called the Seamless Garment Network. So that was, some of you will remember that. It's really been good for me to reconnect with Carol and to have several conversations with Rose. I just have such high regard and respect for Rose and her absolute vigilance about the work of trying to make the world a place fit to live in. And I really wish that she could be here today. I want to say thank you to Carol and Rose and all of the others that have been committed to keeping the waters troubled in our country, and who've kept the vigil for peace and life without violence, even though the challenges seem to get larger every day. And I want to start by, one of the things I think is that we take ourselves way too seriously. And so it helps to do some bringing ourselves back to focus. And I want to begin by reading a little children's story. And I don't know when was the last time somebody read a story to you, but hearing stories is wonderful. And actually telling each other our stories is wonderful. And it's mostly the best way to communicate, because people are interested in telling their story, and people are interested in hearing other people's stories. And we don't find enough opportunities for people to really listen to us anyway. I think a real big part of what's wrong in the world is that we don't listen. We don't listen to each other, and we don't have a sense that we're being heard. And when people don't feel like they're being heard, it leads to violence, it leads to rage, and it leads to violence. So this book, some of you will remember, and those of you who have children may be having it right now in your library. It's called Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. I went to sleep with gum in my mouth, and now there's gum in my hair. And when I got out of bed this morning, I tripped on the skateboard, and by mistake, I dropped my sweater in the sink while the water was running, and I could tell it was going to be a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. At breakfast, Anthony found a Corvette Stingray car kit in his breakfast cereal box, and Nick found a junior undercover agent code ring in his breakfast cereal box. But in my cereal box, all I found was breakfast cereal. I think I'll move to Australia. In the carpool, Mrs. Gibson let Becky have a seat by the window. Audrey and Elliot got seats by the window too. I said I was being scrunched. I said I was being smushed. I said, if I don't get a seat by the window, I'm going to be car sick. No one even answered. I could tell it was going to be a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. At school, Mrs. Dickens liked Paul's picture of the sailboat better than my picture of the invisible castle. At singing time, she said I sang too loud. At counting time, she said I left out 16. Who needs 16? I could tell it was going to be a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. I could tell because Paul said I wasn't his best friend anymore. He said that Philip Parker was his best friend, and that Albert Moyo was his next best friend, and that I was only his third best friend. I hope you send an attack, I said to Paul. I hope the next time you get a double-decker strawberry ice cream cone, the ice cream part falls off the cone and part of it lands in Australia. There were 2 cupcakes in Philip Parker's lunchbox, and Albert got a Hershey bar with almonds, and Paul's mother gave him a piece of jelly roll that had little coconut sprinkles on the top. Guess whose mother forgot to put in dessert? It was a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. That's what it was, because after school, my mom took us all to the dentist, and Dr. Fields found a cavity just in me. Come back next week and I'll fix it, said Dr. Fields. So next week I said, I'm going to Australia. On the way downstairs, the elevator door closed on my foot, and while we were waiting for my mom to go get the car, Anthony made me fall where it was muddy, and when I started crying because of the mud, Nick said I was a crybaby. And let's see here. While I was punching Nick for saying crybaby, my mom came back with the car and scolded me for being muddy and fighting. I'm having a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day, and no one even answered. So then we went to the shoe store to buy some sneakers. Anthony chose white ones with blue stripes. Nick chose red ones with white stripes. I chose blue ones with red stripes. But then the shoe man said, "We're all sold out." They made me buy plain old white ones, but they can't make me wear them. When we picked up my dad at his office, he said I couldn't play with his copying machine, but I forgot. He also said to watch out for the books on his deck, and I was careful as could be except for my elbow. He also said don't fool around with his phone, but I think I called Australia. My dad said please don't pick him up anymore. It was a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. There were lima beans for dinner, and I hate limas. There was kissing on TV, and I hate kissing. My bath was too hot. I got soap in my eyes. My marble went down the drain, and I had to wear my railroad trade pajamas. I hate my railroad trade pajamas. When I went to bed, Nick took back the pillow he said I could keep, and the Mickey Mouse nightlight burned out, and I bit my tongue. The cat wants to sleep with Anthony, not with me. It has been a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. My mom says some days are like that, even in Australia. So, last week when I saw the news, I don't have a television anymore, because I've decided that I don't need TV in my life. Yay. And so I don't have cable and I don't have TV. I watch a little bit of news on the computer. I read what I think I need to know. And what I discovered last week were stories about the comments made by Rush Limbaugh and comments made by Judge Siebel. Actually, he was writing his letter of apology to the president for sending the emails saying making derogatory comments about President Obama's mother. And I felt like that was a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. And I wasn't sure I wanted to move to Australia because I think they're probably pretty racist. And I was going to have to deal with that. But I wanted to move somewhere. And I think that many of you, as you have been in this struggle against war, poverty, euthanasia, racism, abortion, the death penalty, and the new expressions of rage that we see in the uncivil and vile discourse that's going on in our country, it makes you sometimes wish there was some other place you could find to live. But what we know is that if we take a stand to live in a consistent life ethic way, or consistent ethic life, I always get this life ethic, I got it right. If we take that stand, we take ourselves with us wherever we go. So even if we could find some place to go, the truth of the matter is we take ourselves, and whatever we found there to threaten justice, we would still understand that justice threatened anywhere is justice threatened everywhere. Amen. And we would find ourselves, I'm sure, in the middle of the same kind of controversy, no matter where we lived on the planet, because at the present moment, unfortunately, there's nowhere on the planet to live where there isn't some kind of conflict. I've had to spend a lot of time and thought to continue to be able to be consistent in my thinking about what it is I'm going to stand for. And I want to just say a little bit about my background so you can understand why this was a challenge. I grew up on a farm in Arkansas with a father who was illiterate, was a sharecropper, and a mother who graduated from college the same year that I graduated from high school. And my mother went to college all of my early life. She went to took correspondence courses, went to extension programs, now would be called distance learning, but that was what she did. And because she thought that she never said to me, you need to get an education, but you don't ever have to say that if you grow up in a house where somebody is working diligently trying to get an education. My father was illiterate, and so I used to have to go with him wherever he needed to sign his name. He would take me, and he would make an X, and then I would write his name. When I had a brother who was 12 who had an attack of appendicitis, and we lived in Arkansas. And my father took him to the hospital, which was 17 miles from us in El Dorado. And they refused to see him because it was the Warner Brown Hospital for white people, even though that's not what the label said outside. And so they said, take him, we won't take him. So my father had to take him to the charity hospital, the hospital for poor folks and black folks in Shreveport, Louisiana, which was 75 miles away. And by the time they did that, my brother's appendix had ruptured and he got peritonitis, and a few days later he died. He was 12 years old. My father never overcame the grief of that. When he died in his 70s, he was still as grief-struck. He used to talk about Garland almost every day. And I grew up with that sense of loss and helplessness and defenselessness and anger. And somehow, on many levels, I realized I had to find a way for my life not to be fraught with that. That I had to find a way to have a life that somehow had left me the possibility of feeling like I had some agency, I could do something in the world. And that's a part of what started me on my journey. When I was 8 years old, I used to get up and go sit on the back door steps and talk to God. I'd be clear that I had no idea who I was talking to. But I knew that there had to be somebody bigger than the folks in my house, because there was too much trouble in that house. and then they didn't seem to know how to deal with it. And I heard about God, and I thought that must be who I needed to talk to. It was a gift to grow up on the farm in Arkansas and have that opportunity to start connecting to something bigger than myself, connecting to the clouds and the sunrise and the outdoors, and paying attention to the animals and the flowers, and starting to get some sense that that the world can make some sense, and that things are all a part of each other. Nobody told me that kind of stuff, but I had to try to make sense. I had to figure out, how can I live in this world with this skin and with this energy that I am growing up in? And it pushed me to seek a path. And that path led me to faith, led me to Jungian psychology, led me to the understanding that everything is connected and everybody is connected, and God is in everybody. I don't care where on the planet they are, I don't care what they know or don't know. Everybody is as good as everybody else. Amen. And once that got clear in my head, then it was easy to stand up for a high quality of life, to stand up for not killing people, period, unborn or born, period, not listening to gossip, not killing people in my thought processes, because there are all kinds of ways to kill people. And we can be so sanctimonious until we think, if I stand against one thing over here, and then I can label all those awful folks over there. Well, you just did what the awful folks are doing by labeling them awful and relegating them. There are some folks that I would like to send to hell. I want to be clear about that. But that is not one of my jobs. My job is to try to find a way. And you have your list too, so I know you do, and I usually like to say it nicer and say I'd like for them to leave the planet, but I actually have come to modify that. And for some of the folks who write to me in response to my column, I really just want them to go to hell. But I burned white sage around my computer because the Native Americans believe that you can create new energy with white sage. And so some of the stuff that folks write to me is really very ugly. And I have learned to, at first it used to scare me a little bit, but then I got past that. And then well, I was supposed to be saying this later, but I'll tell you now since I brought it up. When I started writing for the Macon paper 4 years ago, There were white men in Macon that actually went to the Telegraph to try to talk to the publisher to get him to stop me from writing because I talked about race, and they hated me. And instead of having the guts to argue with me on the basis of my arguments, they would say very ugly things, even in their, mostly in their emails, because I guess the ugliest of the letters didn't get published, but some of the ones that did get published were ugly enough. And I understand, and you know, this is no offense to the white men in this room, because I don't think you fit in this category, or you probably wouldn't be sitting in these chairs. But I understand white men who grew up thinking that the world belonged to them and that they were in charge of everything. When they have to look at a black man in the White House, it's just got to be their worst nightmare, because that is the place where that's the pivotal point of power. And so I understand why they get so pissed off at me, because I dare to say racism is a system that has to be stood against, and that you don't have to, you know, I never attack anybody personally, but systems are open to any kind of attack. And if you're supporting a system that participates in death more than it does life, then it's a system that is indefensible. And so, and this is the kind of stuff that I write. And then these people send me some, you know, why are you complaining? You got your PhD and you got your endowed chair. What in the world does that have to do with anything? Right. You know, I'm not talking about what I got. I'm talking about systems that keep people from having opportunities to live life at the highest quality. And you can't understand that. And what is it about this that you don't understand? And why you can't understand it is because you don't believe everybody is as good as you are. So it's okay for some people not to have a high quality of life because they're not as good as you. And if you thought that they were as good as you, then you would be willing to be in a different place. And so, you know, and what I did for a while was I would write folks who, if they wrote me an email, I would invite them to coffee. So I had coffee with these white men who hated me, 2 or 3 of them who had the guts to come meet me. Most of them don't have the guts to talk to me in person. But there were a couple, and there was one guy who was actually, he was at Mercer as a basketball coach, and he was so determined to get me to write what he wanted me to write, which is amazing to me. Why should you think you can tell me what to write? I mean, that was totally boggles my mind. And no understanding of democracy, you know, anyway, he met with me a couple of times, and then after he realized he couldn't get me to change, he then started going around trying to get people not to invite me to speak, and trying to, you know, go to the paper and tell them don't let her write, and, you know, and it just, after a while it got to be kind of a funny thing, because the newspaper was, thank God they had the courage not to cave in, because some of the folks that were complaining actually probably had a whole lot more money than I've got, but they knew that there would be an outcry in the community, because there were many folks who did appreciate the fact that somebody was trying to talk about race, trying to talk about poverty, trying to talk about all of the ways in which we are so comfortable with letting people's lives be lost right in our midst, and how we can be so tunnel vision that we pick one thing we want to focus on, and then the rest of the stuff somehow gets pushed to the side. And I kept saying, we've got to look at this whole picture. We have to look at the whole picture. Right now, the thing that concerns me the most is the ways in which many of us are acquiescing to the treatment of Mexicans in our communities, and particularly African Americans. I am so mad that we as African Americans could be ready to criticize Mexicans rather than to stand up and say, I don't care what the problems are, I will not be quiet while people are being mistreated in my midst, period. There is no discussion about that. Now, yes, we do have a problem with immigration. We need to fix it. But we don't need to fix it on the backs of the least of the folks that are here. We need to figure out some say to me about talking about immigration. You know, well, what do you just want you know, people just hear what they want to hear. I understand that. But it's not about that we don't have a problem. It's not about that we need to deal with what we're trying to, what the problem is that we have created, because we did create it.
Amen.
But we need to understand that the bottom line has always got to be, let's be humane. Mm-hmm. That is what being consistent in the way you approach life means. That you have a bottom line. For me, the bottom line is, let's be humane. And even when I'm dealing with people who you know, I have to say to God, I know you want me to pray for these folks, but you know what? I don't want to. And I know you love them just as much as you love me, but I wish you didn't. And then after I get through being honest about it, then I can ask for them to be blessed. And I realize I don't have to call all of them up and try to invite them to speak with me. I understand that part too. But, you know, and you just have to be honest about where you are. I mean, that's the first place you have to do. In terms of being consistent, you have to be consistent inside of yourself. You have to weave those broken pieces of yourself together so that you don't end up going out in the world trying to fix what you didn't fix inside yourself. Mm-hmm. And I believe that from the bottom of my heart. And because of the pain of growing up as a poor girl in Arkansas with an enraged father, I had to learn how was I going to be able to live in this world with peace. Mm. Because if you don't have peace personally, then it doesn't make any difference that you're out trying to get peace in the world. Because if you're in turmoil yourself, there can be no peace, because it starts with us. And it's, you know, that doesn't mean you don't work 365 days to the year from morning until night trying to achieve whatever it is you're trying to achieve. But whatever it is you're trying to achieve, you need to make sure that it lives in your heart. It is not easy for me to live with compassion in Macon, Georgia. Because there's some people I just don't want to have any compassion for, because I wish they'd just go somewhere else. But it doesn't matter. Every time I'm confronted with another person that is difficult to have compassion for, I get to learn to have more compassion for those parts of myself that I need to do something about. And the more compassion I can have toward myself, the more I can externalize compassion to other people. And the more I can be courageous toward bringing whatever changes need to come in my own heart, the more courage I can go out into the world to show. Now, I am such a pacifist until I take bugs outside. Some little bug got on me the other day and I just took him outside. I get so sick of people swatting little things just because it's a habit to kill. It's a habit. You know, if you kill little bugs and you kill this and you kill that, and after a while killing gets to be easier for you. And then to imagine killing is easier. You know, you have to watch, you know, I caught myself and realized I was watching people be killed on television and acting like I didn't think that had anything to do with me. Mm-hmm. And it has everything to do with me. And that's why I don't have television anymore, because most of what's on there is killing somebody in some kind of way. If it's not really shooting people, then people are saying ugly things, and you know, and ugly thoughts and ugly projections are also things, sources of death. Mm-hmm. It just takes maybe a little longer for the person to die if you're thinking ugly stuff. But after a while, you kill them in your heart. You kill them in your thoughts, and you kill off parts of yourself with that. So I think to be consistent means that you have to be consistent yourself. And that's the hardest part for me. That is the hardest part. And if I could just go out here and speak and write and just, you know, tool along with all this and not ever be confronted with my own shadow, my own darkness, and my own propensities to not love, then life wouldn't be too difficult. But it's pretty complex when it gets down to, so how are you going to get through the day? You know, how peaceful are you going to be? How much of the present are you going to be willing to live into? And I have to confess, I don't think I like the present too well. I really just, you know, do you like the present? Do you stay focused? You're always in the present, always attending to what's in front of you? Or do you catch yourself running ahead to what's coming next? Or going back to what was? You know, it's a part of the challenge of living. And I work with that challenge by spending a lot of time being quiet. I try to practice a day a week of being silent. And I go on a lot of silent retreats, and I try, because I believe the more silence I can cultivate inside my own heart, the better I will be able to listen to what I need to hear in terms of myself and in terms of people around me. Now, rather than just sit here and sound like I'm just a little Miss Pollyanna, let me just tell you a few things that continue to be a big struggle. I don't know if you've been keeping up with the new expressions of racism that have come since the election of President Obama. In some ways, I almost am sorry that President Obama is president, because in some ways, though I guess it's better to know the truth than it is not to, the racism that has presented itself in the last 3 years has been so disconcerting. The ugliness that has come up has been very hurtful, very hurtful. And the uncivil and uncivilized language that we hear, and in some of the stuff that has come out around race, has been almost surprising. But on the other hand, I guess it shouldn't have been surprising if I was just willing to believe that we really were doing better than we're doing, actually. And the other thing that I find to be disconcerting is that people are able to acquiesce to the uncivil language and to the ways in which, you know, do you get to malign somebody just because you don't like them? And can you cover up racism by saying it's free speech? You know, and I believe in free speech, and I would die for the right for somebody to have the right to speak freely. But I don't believe in being uncivil. And I don't believe that I can call you all kinds of ugly names and say all kinds of ugly things about you and then hide behind, oh, it's my right to say that. It is not my right to try to assassinate you with words. That is not a right that we have in this country. And I have heard people in religious communities arguing about free speech and kind of acquiescing to some of this stuff. And it just, you know, that's when I have to go be quiet for a day. Because otherwise I'm going to say something I don't have any business saying either. And I don't know if you've been keeping up with the stuff that has been being said under the guise of disagreeing with the president. I don't care if you don't like the president, if you don't agree with him. He's a politician. If he can't take it, he shouldn't have run for office. But you don't have any right to be making references to him being a monkey or a dog or talking about his children and all of that. You don't have any right to that. You can dislike him all you want to. You can dislike his policies. You can debate them. I don't have any problems with that. But my problem is with being civil. And then you think about what occurs to me is that when you think about if the President of the United States is being talked about like this because he's a black man, and that is the only reason, it's not because of his policies, because the policies aren't being argued. If he's talked about because he's a black man, what about the thousands and thousands of young black men who don't have any education, don't have any sense of themselves, don't have any sense of purpose? How are they being talked about? How are they being seen? And the judge in Montana who sent that god-awful email maligning the president's mother, a federally elected judge, wonder what kinds of judgments people have been getting, people of color have been getting when they have to stand in front of him if he is willing to malign the President of the United States. So I'm not so concerned about the president, except that I do think that rage and hatred makes his life more tenuous than it would be if it wasn't happening. But I'm more concerned ultimately about the thousands of nameless folks that are being treated in very bad ways across this country because of the color of their skin, whether they're black or brown or whatever color. I am much more concerned about that than I am him, because ultimately I think he can take care of himself. And I want to refer you to a couple of books that I think will be helpful on this subject. One of them is called Brainwashed by Tom Burrell. And Tom Burrell is an African American who owned an advertising business in Chicago, and he retired and now has written this amazing book about the historical ways, the historical brainwashing of African Americans, and also the ways in which the systems of racism have been so entrenched that it makes we who are the victims of it complicit with keeping the system intact. It's a very good book, and I recommend it highly. The other book is Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, which looks at how we're using the prison system to control people of color. The same as we used the Jim Crow laws when the Jim Crow laws were intact. I think that this new rendition or new expression of racism has prompted us to really have to take a new look at where we are, and I think it's been destabilizing to African Americans. I think Carol and I were talking about this last night, particularly the sense of hopelessness. You would think that if you looked in the White House and you saw a black family, that you would somehow feel a sense of pride and stuff. But you have to have some internal capacity to feel pride. You have to have some sense of agency about yourself. You have to believe that your life is going somewhere in order to be inspired. Inspiration has to connect with something. And I spent 10 years working in public housing with people who had so little sense of anything beyond, can I just get the light bill paid? Or can I put food on the table? I worked with Aunt Maggie's kitchen table in a public housing facility where all of the children that were in that complex went to the school that was right up the street from us, and every child in that school was on free lunch. So you can see what the income levels were. When you're in an environment where everybody has this kind of sense of there's only right now and survival, then it's very hard to have a sense of being hopeful, of having hope. And if you don't have hope, it's very difficult to go forward. And actually, African Americans right now, today, as we sit here in this room, across the board, are doing worse than we were some years ago. In terms of economic stability, in terms of being, having a sense of hope. You know, the violence, the crime, the violence, the domestic abuse.